Afternoon, everybody. So good news, we do have an attendance code for this session this week. The bad news is I've still not been provided with my own login so that I can generate those codes. So the line manager has actually had to generate that, and then she's emailed it to me. So hopefully all that will be sorted out by next week, and I'll be able to give you those codes and generate them myself. But yeah, at least we've got one for this session. So I've put that in the chat, so you can see that there. It's at the top of the chat window. So yeah, you can put that into your app, and that's that sorted out. So in terms of what we're going to cover this week, I'll just share my screen. So you should be looking at week 5 in the learning materials on my screen there. And the two screenshots that are shown in that section are the two tutorial tasks that we're actually going to tackle in this session. So the guide on what to do for each of those tasks is the first and second PDF that's listed there. So there's one entitled Style Surface PDF, and that is to create this sort of joystick grip shape that we're going to create. And then the second one there is Surfacing Mouse Body Shape PDF. And then the subsequent ones below that are sort of additional materials that you can have access to, and you can kind of go away and do some self-guided learning on Creo. So these ones are more kind of detailed, the description of the steps that you have to take in order to run through these tutorials at the bottom of the list. So it's expected that you will put some time in outside of the tutorials and actually practice some of the skills. But certainly in the tutorial, we're going to cover these first two, and we're going to hopefully generate something that looks a little bit like this grip shape and that looks a little bit like this mouse shape at the bottom. Right, so let's have a little talk about the kind of area that we're going to explore within Creo. So it's something that's known as surface modeling, and generally surface modeling in a CAD system such as Creo, you would use it more often when you are creating kind of surfaces or shapes in your parts that have kind of complex curvature to them. So hopefully you can see from this grip shape here that the actual finished design for the grip would not be easy to describe or to define using the tools that we've looked at already. So the extrude tool, it would be quite difficult to create this shape with, given that it's got kind of an indent in the side here. It has surfaces or faces on it that have double curvature. So they curve in one direction, but they also simultaneously curve in the other direction as well. So generally, when you're trying to design these more kind of free-flowing style-based surfaces or style-based parts, you would use some of these surface modeling techniques that we're going to cover this week. So likewise, the mouse shape here, although you could argue it's sort of a more standard looking shape, it does have a certain amount of double curvature to it. So you can see we have a tri-view viewpoint of the mouse here, one where we're looking down from above, one where we're looking at it from the back, and one where we're looking at it from the side. And if we take the kind of high point, the spine of the shape, you can see that it has curvature when it's viewed from the side, but it also has curvature when it's viewed from the rear or from the front as well. So in order to create these sorts of shapes, often you would want to use surface modeling as your kind of starting point. So that's when you might choose to use surface modeling techniques rather than where can you find the record of tutorial 3 and 4? So what we've ended up doing, there's a little bit in here to do with holes and patterns that we've already covered. So the way that these are structured in the learning materials here is a little bit different to the way that we've worked through them. But all the video content should be on the YouTube channel. Let's just have a click through. So yeah, there's a more sort of thorough coverage of all the subjects that we're going to tackle in that link there. And then there's specific content from 1 and 2. Let's have a look at that as well. I thought there was a link to that somewhere. Learning materials. Yeah, I will post that on there from the other weeks. So I will stick it a second link somewhere in there, in that section at the top. So yeah, don't worry about that. But if you want to get into what we've covered in some of the other sessions, a lot of it is already covered in my sort of generic YouTube link there that splits everything down into sort of easily digestible subheadings, if you like. So we've got patterns and we've got holes and we've got drafts and shell. Yeah. But I will post the specific session recordings on there as well. So just keep your eye on that section of the learning materials. So let's make a start on what we're going to tackle first. So we're going to tackle this grip first, and we're going to use a tool. We're obviously, as I've already said, going to be using surfacing modeling techniques or surface modeling techniques, but we're going to use a specific tool within Creo called the style surface to actually achieve this kind of sculpted, complicated curvature on this grip. So if you want to get the PDF open in the second screen, and the reason I'm working through these two examples, and I'm leaving you to look at the ones lower down in this list, is that these two examples I've written very much in a sort of pictorial fashion. So there's minimal text, if any text at all. These are just sort of a recipe in terms of screenshots of how you produce this part. So that's why I'm guiding you through this one in the tutorial session, whereas the other tutorials lower down in this list, they're a lot more fully featured, so you should be able to work through those kind of on your own. So yeah, back to what we're doing. So this is the kind of shape that we're aiming for. This is sort of the finished article. That's another screenshot of the finished article. This is where we begin our sort of workflow to get towards there. So we're going to create a new part, and it's going to be a solid part, and I've given it the name of style surface because that's kind of the tool that we're going to be using to create this. So yeah, I recommend that you do the same. I'm just going to drag that onto my other screen so I can keep referring back to it. So we're in Creo. Normally, as we've said before, you'll be seeing your browser window here. I find that quite annoying, so I've blocked the browser in my firewall, but you just want to shut that down. Click on the new icon to create a new file. The system should default into part as its default file type. Solid, that should also be selected as well. And let's call it style surface. Taking note of the fact that you've got to put that underscore between the two words, otherwise Creo will reject it because it doesn't like spaces in your file names. So then I'm going to click on OK. You may or may not get this option to choose your template that you want to use. The one that we always use for these examples is millimeters, newtons, seconds, part solid. So that's the one that we want. We drop into the part modeling environment. And the first thing that we're going to do, as I've already said, we're going to use something called the style surface or the styling tool to do the main shape of this design. So the style tool is there. So I'll just hover over that for a second. You can see there's a whole kind of subsection of the model tab. So we always tend to be in the model tab when we're creating new geometry. There's a whole section there that's to do with surfaces, and style is one of those types of surfaces. And again, if we read the description, create freeform curves and surfaces. So that would kind of apply to the shape that we're attempting to create. It would be sort of apt to describe that as kind of a freeform shape or a freeform surface. So let's initiate the style tool. And then the first thing that we want to do is we want to adjust the active plane here. Just let me get my PDF on the other screen. So that our view is looking directly at the active plane. So what I did there was click on that icon, because initially I was looking at this plane kind of from an isometric viewpoint like that. And for the curves that we want to sketch on this plane initially, we want to be viewing it at 90 degrees. So that's what that icon does. It rotates your view round. And then what we're going to aim to create ultimately is a shape on that plane that looks something like that shape there. And again, we're not at this point going to be too concerned with the actual dimensions of this shape. So the intention of this tutorial is to show you the steps that you would go through to create a design such as this, but we're not going to slavishly stick to putting dimensions on all these points that we're about to sketch. It's more the broad concept of how you use the style tool that we're going to cover. But know that you could put dimensions on these sketches later on in the design process. So let's scroll to the section where we're going to begin. So what are we going to do? We're going to create a curve. So we're going to click on the curve icon in the menu at the top there that's been initiated, the style menu. So click on curve, and then we're just going to sketch something that looks approximately like that. So every time we click, we're going to drop a point of this curve, and then we're going to move on to the next one and click again, drop a second point, and then we're going to move on to the third position and click again, drop the third point. So if you want to sketch it so yours appears approximately as mine does, helpfully we've got these grid squares visible, so we can all kind of judge where these points are relative to the origin. And then when we've finished, we're just going to click on OK at the top there. So we're going to OK the curve. And again, the behavior of the system is we're inside a style feature here. So we're creating things within the style feature. But within that feature, we've chosen to create a curve. So you can see we're at the curve level at the moment, but the style feature is still active. And as soon as we OK this, we exit out of the creation of the curve, but we drop back into the creation process of creating the style feature as a feature. So click OK, you drop back into the style feature. Now we're going to put a similar curve. So we're going to get the curve tool again, and we're going to go below the datum line this time. So this is the kind of broad outline shape of our grip that we're going to create. So something like that would be fine. If I then want to tweak the positions that I've ended up with here, if I'm not quite happy with the, let's say, the amount of curvature in this lower style curve, what I would do would be OK it initially, and then if I double click on the curve that I've dropped, I then get the ability to drag the curve points into the shape that I intend them to be. So maybe I'd want a little bit more curvature there. So you can always drop back in and just modify the actual points of the curve that you've created. So I'm happy with that now. So I'll click on OK. So now what I want to do, again, referring back to our guide PDF, is I want to create a simple kind of straight line that joins the ends of this shape. So I'm creating these two end pieces. And again, within the style tool, I don't really have the access to all the different types of sketching tools that I have traditionally when I'm creating say an extrude feature or a revolve feature. Everything is kind of referred to as just a curve. So again, I'll click on the curve tool. It's just that this time the curve is going to be, it's going to have 2 points rather than 3. And those 2 points are just going to trace the shortest path between the 2 ends of the other 2 curves. So it essentially forms a straight line, even though the system still refers to it as a curve. So before I place this curve, I'm going to zoom in a little bit first. And then, because I want this curve to lock itself to the endpoints of these 2 existing curves, I have to hold down the Shift key to get it to do that. So again, it's slightly different behavior to what we are used to when we use the sketching tool. So when you're creating these style surfaces, the methods that you use aren't exactly the same, or are significantly different to the methods that you use to build up your geometry when you're creating solid features like the extrude or the revolve or any of the other features that we've looked at. So yeah, hold down Shift, go near the end of one of your curves, and notice that as you get near the end of them, the pointer turns from just a normal pointer, an arrow, into kind of a cross shape. So when you see the cross shape, that means that when you click, the end of your new curve or new straight line is locked to the end of that line. And that's represented by that green circle there. So I'm going to do that again. I'm still holding Shift down. I haven't let go of Shift yet. So then I go near this end. I get that little cross icon visible. And when I click, that end is then being locked to the end of that lower curve. So I'm happy with that curve. I'm going to click on OK. And I'm going to do the same thing again, but on this side. Just let me read the chart. Repeat from the start. That's okay. I can go back to the start. So let me back up a few steps there. I've gone all the way back out of the style feature. So for anyone that missed the first bit of that there, for everybody else, you can kind of pause where you are and I'll catch you up again now. So we're creating a style surface as the basis for our grip that we're looking to create. So I'll initiate a style feature by clicking on the style icon there. Then when I initially came in, I had sort of an isometric viewpoint like that. So the plane that has been selected for me to create my sketches on, which is the top plane in this instance, I want to view it so I'm looking down from above. So I'm looking straight at the plane or at 90 degrees to it. And the way you do that is that icon at the top there. So active plane orientation. So when you click on that, your view should rotate around so that you're looking at the active plane. It's actually known as normal to the plane or at 90 degrees. And what we're aiming to create from 4 curves is that shape there. So we're aiming to put an initial curve in that sort of approximates that one, a second curve in that approximates something like that one, and then 2, these are technically still curves within the system's way of naming things. It's just that they only have 2 points in them. They have an endpoint there and an endpoint there. So let's create those. So I'll just keep that on my other screen for reference. So there's the create curve option when you're in the style tool, as we are at the moment. So we're creating a style feature. Within the style feature, we're going to add a curve. So click on curve, and then wherever I click on the screen, it's going to drop a point on the curve. So I'm going to click there initially. Again, in this particular example, we're not going to add dimensions to this. We're just going to play with some of the features that are available in the style tool. So you want to do 3 clicks and create something that looks approximately like that. But don't worry if it doesn't look too much like that. We can come back in later and we can edit these. So you don't have to hit it perfectly the first time. So then we're happy with that curve. So I'm going to OK it. So I'm going to click OK, and that will OK this curve, but we will still be inside the style feature. We'll still be in the process of creating the style feature itself. So I'll click on OK to OK the curve. Select the curve tool again because I want to put a second curve in. And then the second one is also going to have 3 points to it. So I'm going to just sketch that out, something like that. And again, don't worry if it's not perfect, it's not the perfect shape. You can come back in and you can drag the points around and get them as you need them. But approximately, with relation to the grid that we've got there, that's the kind of shape that I want. So we'll click on OK. Now we've got the two end curves or straight lines, if you want to call them that. We're just going to use the curve tool again. But this time, rather than drop 3 points along the curve, so it has that kind of curved shape to it, we're just going to drop 2 points, one at either end. So it ends up being a straight line. But as we do that, we want to lock it on to the endpoints of the other two curves. And the way that we make the system do that is that before we click, we've got to hold down the Shift key. So as we're holding the Shift key, if we go near the ends of the other curves, that cross shape appears as we get near. And when the cross shape is visible, if you click, that endpoint of the new curve has been locked to the endpoint of that other curve. So I've still got the Shift key held now, and I'm going to do the same thing on the end of this one. So when the cross shape appears, click, and there, that curve's now been inserted, so I can OK that one. And then I've just got one more to create, so I'm going to do the same thing at this end. So click on curve again, hold down the Shift key, and don't let go of it until you've finished this curve. So click there so it locks it onto the end of that lower curve. Go near the end of the upper curves till I can see the cross icon, and then click again. And then I've got my final curve in there. So I'm going to click on OK. So we've got that shape. So what do we want to do with this next? Well, here's sort of a little pictorial description of what we're trying to do. So we can see that in this screenshot, the view's been rotated back round to be kind of an isometric view. So you're looking from more of a sort of 3D viewpoint rather than straight down onto the plane. You can see the plane there with a sort of grid pattern on it. And what we're ultimately looking to do is we're looking to make these previously straight end pieces actually point upwards away from the plane. So in this example here, the process has already begun of giving this previously straight line some curvature. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to tell the system, as that line begins here on the endpoint of that line there that it's being locked to, I want it to exit at 90 degrees to the plane. I want it to rise upwards initially before then curving back down to this point over here. So that's what we're going to try and do. The way that we're going to do it is we're going to go back in and edit the curve, but we're going to edit this directional control that sort of controls the exit direction that that curve takes when it leaves the point on the end of the curve. So this will become clear as we actually do the task. So let's rotate our viewpoint back to a sort of more isometric viewpoint. So something like that will be fine. So now we can appreciate that these curves are flat on the plane currently, and we can also, or we will be able to appreciate when we add some kind of vertical curvature to them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to double click on that curve to activate edit mode for the curve. I'm going to single click on one of the endpoints, and when I do, this drag handle appears in green, and then I can click with the left mouse button and drag that, and you can see the effect that I'm having on it. So I'm clicking and holding and dragging. So essentially, I have the ability to tell the system which direction I want this curve to exit that endpoint in. And I can do... Go on, sorry. Yep. I'm just reading some of the chat again. First one, 5 and 2. Yeah, I think we're okay. So I can do that with either end of the curve. If I click on this end of the curve, the drag handle appears for that curve. and I'm free to kind of drag that around as I see fit. Now, to appreciate what we've done there, we kind of have to rotate our view, and what may have appeared as getting the curve to leave the plane was in actual fact an optical illusion. So you can see as I view the plane edge on, we haven't actually achieved what we ultimately want to, which is we want this curve to rise up out of the plane before dropping back down to its other endpoint. So in order to do that, we can't simply use these drag handles, because these drag handles themselves currently are stuck to the plane itself. So we're only kind of affecting the curve on the actual plane, and we don't want to do that. We want to make the curve rise up out of the plane. Let's have a look at the direction arrows. So in the Y direction, so you can see there, I've got the directional sort of tri-directional coordinate system visible in the middle there. So we want it to rise up in the Y direction. So the way that we do that is if we long right click on that drag handle, we get a menu that appears there. And of the options, I kind of slipped in earlier that the name for at 90 degrees to a plane is normal to the plane. So that word normal there means at 90 degrees. So if we select that, the drag handle should then, let's have a look. Why has that not worked? I'll try that again. So select the drag handle. Aha, yes, I missed a step there. So the system sneakily is asking me a question there. It's saying select a plane. Select a plane for the tangent normal. And what I have to do is tell it which plane I want that drag handle to be at 90 degrees to, or normal to. And it's this plane. So it's the top plane in our case. So I need to click on that and select it. And then we've kind of achieved what we need to achieve there, except the direction of the drag handle is chosen to go downwards into the plane. And I want it to actually go upwards like that. So you can see now the curve rises up out of the plane itself. So the directional influence of the end of that curve has been set to be always at 90 degrees to the plane that the curve was created on. So I'm going to do the same thing with this end now. So select this endpoint, appreciate that there's a drag handle there. Yeah, I can see it, but currently it's stuck to the plane. So it's only, actually it's pointing downwards. But anyway, we need to set it as normal to the plane. So long right click. If you short right click, yeah. So again, this is kind of a quirk of Creo. I don't know many other CAD systems that operate like this. So you access that menu by kind of holding the right mouse button for a period of about a second and a half, and then the menu pops up, which kind of throws some people off when they first start using Creo. So yeah, set that to normal to the plane. It's then going to ask me again, down at the bottom left here, select a plane for tangent normal. So top plane again. Again, it's picked randomly. Should it go kind of downwards into the plane or upwards? It's picked the wrong one for our purposes for this tutorial. So we want to grab that drag handle by clicking with the left mouse button and holding, and drag it upwards like that. So hopefully you can see already we're kind of roughing out the general shape of our grip. So this is the kind of half shape of our grip. So if you imagine this curve here being extruded, for want of a better word, along these two curves, you would end up with half our handle shape. So if I quickly scroll back, have a look at our handle there, we're defining that shape on the end currently. So the half section of the handle is kind of what we're defining. And then we already have kind of the outside spine shape up there. We haven't put the kind of indents that we need for our sort of finger grip on this side yet, but we do have the sort of broad sort of shape of the sort of internal curve there. So yeah, we're gradually building up this this kind of shape that we're aiming for in our design. So let's do the same thing to our straight line or our straight curve on the other end of the series of curves that we've created. So we're happy with this one. This one on this end, we're happy with. We put some curvature into it in the right direction. It now stands up normal to the actual plane. So it's rising up out of the plane. So we're happy with that for the time being. And as I say, don't get too precious about the shapes that you're creating and whether they're perfectly matching the tutorial, because we can always come back in at some later point and we can easily edit the shape here.
Could you run through that again, Chris? Sorry.
Yeah. Hold on a sec then.
Sorry.
What's the easiest way to get back out? Right, I will cancel out of that. Here we go. So, are you at that point? You've got the flat version.
Yeah, I've got that, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So, we want to edit that curve. So, we just double click on it. It kind of takes us back into the dialog at the top there, or the menu at the top, that we were looking at as we created the curve. So we're free to edit it now. The way that we want to edit this is we want to edit the directional influence that the curve experiences as it leaves both of these endpoints. So currently, and the default is that it just points straight at the other point. So the drag handle on this point, so I just clicked on that point there to make the drag handle visible, and it's visible in green. It's pointing directly at its neighbour, so the next point on the line. And likewise, if I click on the circle on this end of the line, or the end point, the drag handle becomes visible, and it's pointing directly at its neighbour over there. So you end up with just a straight line, because that's the most efficient sort of bridging of that distance. But to appreciate what these handles are capable of, we're just going to click and hold with the left mouse button and kind of drag one of them around and see the influence that it's actually having. So the length of the handle and its direction both influence the shape of the curve. So you can see I'm dragging the kind of direction there, but I'm keeping the length broadly the same. But then when I drag the length, you can see it's influencing much more of the shape. So its sphere of influence, if you like, increases with its length. So there's direction and there's amount of influence on the curve.
Mine doesn't do that. It only goes like across the actual line.
That is strange. Is anyone else experiencing that?
I don't know if I'm not clicking something.
Let's try this again. Let me just back out of here. So yeah, double click on the line. So when you double click on the line, can you see the two endpoints represented as circles?
Yeah, I've got that.
You got that. And then when you click on one of the circles, do you see the kind of drag handle appear there? Do you get that?
It's working now. Cheers.
Yeah? Oh, right. Yeah. There's often little quirks like that where if you try it like a millisecond later, it seems to work. But yeah, we'll try and address them.
Chris, for me, I cannot see the points. So
you can't see the points.
Okay. How can I show it?
So yeah, I'm going to have to unshare my screen, and then you should be able to share your screen. So just let me stop sharing. So yeah, there you go. See if you can share your screen in Zoom now, and I'll see if I can take a look at it. Yeah. Okay.
So when I press shift, it shows like this.
No, that looks okay. Oh no, I'm looking at the PDF. Sorry.
Okay. So
yeah, I can see the PDF on your screen.
Yeah. So
I thought that looks perfect. So yeah.
Yeah, this one.
Right. Okay. So we have the four curves, but that curve isn't visible. So click on the small grey X at the top there, just to quit out of the menu that you're in. So yeah, quit out of there. Right. Okay. So we've so we've got three curves. So if you look over on the left-hand side of the screen, you've got something called the style tree, and you can see at the top there. So can everybody see this? So I can talk everyone through this. Yeah. Yeah, I'm assuming they can. So basically we've got the style feature itself there, which is named Style 1, and then the sort of child features within Style 1, which are subsections of Style 1, are 3 curves there. So you're missing the 4th curve. So if you click on the curve icon at the top of the screen, and then before you begin clicking now, hold down the Shift key, and then, yeah, if you now click there, click once, keep the Shift key held, and click again, and now click on the green tick at the top of the screen. But it's not locked itself on there.
This is the
rather
problem.
odd. But the first end has locked itself on, which is even stranger. Right, okay. Well, okay that anyway, and we'll see if we can lock it on by editing it after we've created it. So zoom into that end that's not connected currently. So zoom your view right in, and now double click on the new line, the green line. Double click on it. So now we're editing it. Now hold the Shift key down, yeah. And now if you click and hold, yeah, like that. There you go. Now it's attached itself. Now let go, and click on the green tick. Yes, now it attached itself.
Works,
so you can see you can go back in and edit a curve and get it to attach itself to the end point of another curve even after you've created it. You don't have to do it on the curve creation.
Is there any way I can display the points always?
Not without editing the actual curve. So if you double click on the curve that you've just created now, so double click in the middle there, there's the endpoints. And then if you single click on one of the endpoints, so single click on there, so it's not immediately visible on your sort of color scheme that you're running Creo in, but try dragging. You saw where the drag handle was on mine. See if you can click somewhere there and make the drag handle become visible.
No, it's not visible now.
Yeah, that's strange. So maybe there's something different in the setup of yours. Just let me investigate it on my screen. So leave your screen on there, and then right, okay. So I think you've got the thing next to the word degree on the left. Click on that so that it deactivates. Switch into interpolation. Yes, there you go. So one of the settings on yours was subtly different to the setup on mine. Which I don't know why that should be. I don't recall coming in and switching that off by default, but it obviously ended up switched on your.
I believe I played with it yesterday. So
right. So that might explain that. So what you're going to have to do now is the curve on the other end of your shape looks as if it is not connected properly on the left there.
So, I will fix it.
So you know the skill to fix it now. You know how to double click and then go back in and hold Shift and just drag it to the end. So you should be okay there. So if you want to unshare that, and I'll reshare my screen again.
Cheers.
So there we go. So we're back in. So the first step to this is to double click on the line that we want to edit. So double click on that line, then single click on one of the endpoints, so it makes us appreciate the fact that it does have these drag handles that we can kind of style as we see fit. So we appreciate that they exist. And then the second bit of that is just rotating your view around to appreciate that currently that curve is kind of stuck to the plane that it was created on. So you can see it's not currently breaking away from the plane, but we can kind of force the issue by, rather than just dragging these handles manually by clicking on them and kind of holding down the left mouse button, we can long right click on one of them. So right mouse button, but for a second or two until this menu appears. And one of the options here is set the drag handle to normal to the plane. So normal to essentially means at 90 degrees to. So if we click on normal, the system then asks us a question, although it's not immediately obvious. But this is a good skill. Looking down towards the bottom left of the screen when it seems as if you don't know what's happening can always kind of give you a little pointer as to what the system's waiting for you to do. So select plane for tangent normal. So it's looking for us to select the plane that we want this handle to be at 90 degrees to, or normal to. So it's that top plane. So I need to hover over the top plane till I see that pop-up that tells me I'm pointing at it, and then click. And then if I rotate my view, I get more of an appreciation of what's just happened. So the drag handle is now pointing directly upwards, in my case, away from the plane. Now, if yours is pointing downwards, it's just a simple case of clicking with the left mouse button and dragging on it till it's pointing upwards. So you can see both are at 90 degrees to the plane, just that one's rising up out of it and the other one's kind of going underneath it. So yeah, we'll set that upwards, and then we'll do the same thing with the other end. So we'll click on the circle at the other end of this curve, make the drag handle visible, and then we'll long right click on that handle, set it to normal. Try that again. I think I missed clicking on the word normal. Try that again. Right. I always miss this step. So it's asking me again, which plane do I want to use as the reference for normal to what? So it's the top plane again. And this time, the system's defaulted to the wrong direction. But again, I can just click and hold with the left mouse button and just drag until it's pointing in the right direction. So that looks okay for our purposes. But as I say, don't worry, because we can come back in here, and we are going to come back in and modify some of this geometry a little bit later on to actually get the shape that we need. So we're happy with this end, so we can OK that curve. We can click on the green tick at the top. Then we're going to do the same thing with the one on this end. So we're going to double click on the curve or line as it is currently. Click on one of the endpoints to make the handle visible. Drag it away slightly. Long right click. Set it to normal. The system will then ask normal to which plane. So we have to tell it the top plane. It's probably easier to select the top plane up here in the model tree, because you know that you're definitely clicking on the right plane there, whereas here you can inadvertently click on something else like the front plane there. So click on top there, it will set that drag handle, make sure it's pointing in the right direction, and then do the same thing again for this end. So it's just setting all these to be normal to the top plane. So yeah, that's largely okay for our purposes. And again, you can kind of rotate around and just check that they are in actual fact pointing in the right direction. It's not an optical illusion. So when you've got something kind of equivalent to that, and as I say, don't be too precious about getting it exactly right at this point. The sort of purpose of this is to show that as you create these style surfaces, you will kind of drop back into edit them multiple times just to kind of refine the shape that they're going to create. So let's move on to the next bit here. So I'll OK that curve to stop editing the curve itself. So OK. And now I want to create a surface based on these curves. So essentially what we're heading towards is something that looks like that. So that's the preview of what we're heading towards, and we're going to use the surface tool. So I've okayed the curve. We're going to tell the system that we want to create a surface. So there's a surface tool on the toolbar there, and then we're going to gather the 4 curves that we're going to use to define the shape of this surface. So you can see that curve's been selected first, then that one on that end, so you can see they're numbered here in the order that they were selected in, and then this one's been selected down here, and then finally number 4 down here, and they've all been kind of gathered up inside the surface, the style surface tool. You can see it says 4 chains there, so those are the 4 curves that we've collected. So that's kind of the workflow that we're going to work through, but I'm going to notice, because I'm paying attention, that I've still got that curve selected. So I'll probably want to click in some empty space to make sure I've not got any of these curves selected, because you can see if I click on one, it kind of highlights over here in the style tree, and that will become the first input into this surface, and I don't want to do that. I want the ability to input them one by one after I've initiated the surface tool. So we'll click on the surface icon. The system again is waiting for some input. What input is it waiting for? Well, it kind of defines it down here again. So select primary curves to define surface, boundaries or rectangles or triangle. Yeah. So I said that it would be that one first. So we're going to click on that curve, hold down the control key, and this is key because if you don't, you'll just select a single curve. So holding down the control key, I'm going to get that one, still holding down the control key, that one, still holding it down, that one. When I click that final one, I should see a preview of what that surface is going to look like. So that looks okay to me. It passes through all the curves. The curves are used to define its shape. Click on OK, and then deselect the surface. So again, the style feature itself kind of has its own model tree that's stored within that style feature. And we'll see this. Our main model tree just has a feature called style 1 within it. And when we OK this feature eventually, that's all we'll see in the model tree, just an icon that will say style 1. But within that style feature, there's multiple sub sort of entities to give them their correct name. So it's almost like a model tree in miniature. But you always have the ability to drop back into it and edit any of these curves or surfaces or whatever we create in here. So where are we headed to next? So because this in the design that we're trying to create, this is the half shape that we want to create. This is half of the finished grip. And because we don't want a kind of harsh ridge running down the mirror line of this grip, so that would be that line there and that line there. We want to tell the system that this surface that it's created needs to also exit that top plane at 90 degrees to the plane, because then when we create a mirror image, the two mirror images will match up with each other. If they both exit their plane of symmetry at 90 degrees to the plane, there will not be a harsh kind of ridge line that will run down the spine there, which is kind of what we want, because ergonomically we wouldn't want a kind of raised ridge that would dig into your fingers and the palm of your hand. So we have to tell the system that next. So even though I've exited that style surface, just to show you what it looks like, we're now going to drop back in and edit it again, which is good practice because we kind of need this skill to be able to get back into style features, edit them, come back out, evaluate what the change has done to the design, get back into them, and so on and so on. So I'm going to select the surface feature there, click on Edit Definition, which is just the standard icon when we're editing any sort of feature. It's always the Edit Definition icon that we click on to get back into it. So Edit Definition, and I'm happy with the curves that I've selected, but as I say, I want to affect the, it's referred to as the tangency of the surface itself. And the way I do that is this little sort of icon here. So you can see there's a small dashed line pointing kind of upwards from the plane. So in the same way that the curves had their drag handles, the surface kind of has something similar. And if I long right click over that drag handle or that dashed line, I get at least some of the options that I had in the curves themselves. So normal, and in this case, it kind of knows that I'm referring to the plane that we created that curve on. So it doesn't request that I select a plane, it knows what plane I'm referring to when I say normal to the plane. You can see the icons change slightly. It's kind of indicating that the surface now exits that plane at 90 degrees to the plane. So that when I mirror it, it's going to merge smoothly into its mirror image. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. On the spine, long right click, set it to normal, and it was subtle, the difference that made, but it did actually make a difference. Let's see if we can detect it. I'll set it back to what it was before, G0. So yeah, there was a subtle difference there. So where this shape ends on this curve and that curve at either end, it's already been set to normal. But in the intervening bit that bridges the gap between those two, it was initially free to do whatever it wanted. But as soon as we change this to normal, at every point along that shape, it exits that plane normal to the plane. So it ensures that we end up with the shape that we need for our design. So yeah, let's OK that when we've set the two side curves to normal, and then progress on. So where are we going to go next with the design? So we're going to OK the full style feature itself and drop back into the standard model tree. So you can see here, hopefully, the style feature's been okayed, and we're heading towards creating a mirror image of it. So you can see there's a mirror command there that's been initiated. And then after that, we're going to merge together the two halves. So we're going to merge them into a unified single surface. So let's back up a little bit there, and we'll do those steps. So we'll OK the style feature. We're happy with the style feature as it stands. OK the style feature. We drop back out of the style sort of sub-menu and sub-environment. We're back up into the normal modeling environment now. We just have a style feature that we can't kind of browse inside it when we're in the normal modeling environment. We can go back in and edit its definition, and we will do in a second, because we want to add some more details into it, such as the finger grips that you saw in the final design. But for the time being, we're just going to mirror it, because I want to get a better appreciation of what sort of shape I've ended up with in its final form. So what I'm going to do is select the surface. And when I do, just pay attention to this section of menu here. So I'm going to deselect it by clicking into some empty space. You can see most of these options, except the project, all get grayed out, so I can't select them. So these only become active, if you like, when I select a suitable surface to use them. And you can see even then, some of them don't become active, because the merge command requires more than one surface, because it's used to merge surfaces together. So click on the surface to select it, apply the mirror tool, which has become active. The mirror tool, unsurprisingly, is asking for a datum plane, or for a plane as a mirror, if you want to think about it like that, an actual mirror. So what do we want to mirror this shape about? Select a plane or an intent datum plane to mirror about. That plane there, the top plane. We get a preview of what that's going to look like. Yeah, I can't spot any problems with that, so I'll click on OK. But then I still have two distinct surfaces there. They've not been merged into a sort of single piece of geometry. So what I have to do if I want to do that is select the first one, hold down Control, select the second one, so they're both highlighted, and then I can merge them together. So I'll click on the merge command. And then what I get is a preview of what the resultant shape will be. So anything that's got that kind of hatching, that sort of square hatching on it, will be retained. So in this merge, it's not particularly exciting. It's just the two halves that are kind of hatched in, which means that the resultant shape will include all of that geometry. So I'll click on OK. So I've merged them together now. So where are we headed next? Are we going to do a thicken? Yes, we are. So let's have a look at the PDF again. So we've gone through the merge option. That's what we wanted to do. Make sure that they were going to get joined together within the merge. So I'm just dropping back into the merge feature to check on one of the sub options within the merge feature. So you can see I've okayed the merge feature. It's in the feature tree or the model tree. Click on the merge, edit definition. That's the kind of standard method that we use to go back in and edit any feature that we create. Edit definition. Options, join. To be honest, in this instance, I don't think that makes much difference. We'll see what difference that does make when we use this option again later on the mouse tutorial example. But we'll click on join. It tends to work differently if we have surfaces that cross through each other and continue on. You can select which bits of them you want trimming away and which bits of them you want retaining. So this has kind of more of an effect then. But we'll set it to join anyway and click on OK. So now what we want to do to kind of fully sort of appreciate what surfaces are within CAD, which we kind of not talked about. We talked about when you might use them and the sorts of products and shapes that you might choose to surface model in terms instead of more traditional what's known as solid modeling, which is what we were doing up to this point in the previous lessons, where you create actual solid pieces of material that can have material applied to them. They have a volume. They are solid all the way through when you do a cross section through them. They're not hollow. Surfaces, in contrast, they have zero volume. And obviously they can't exist in the real world. So in order to produce some kind of manufacturable design, you must transform the surface into a shape that does have volume and that is solid. So the surface itself has zero thickness. And again, that can't exist. When you come to manufacturing time, you can't produce something that doesn't have a thickness to it. And I'm kind of illustrating that. I'm looking through this shape that we've created. And as much as you zoom in, that wall there is 0 millimeters thick. I managed to get rid of it there. So we have to do some sort of modification to the surface that we used to create the shape initially in order to create a solid piece of material. And one of the methods that we can do that within the CAD system is we can say to the system, we've created an outside shape there, but I want to add a thickness of material inwards, in this case, to give it a shape which is a thin piece of material. So I'm going to select the merge that I just created in the model tree, and I'm going to use this command, thicken. So it takes a 0 thickness surface and it adds thickness to it. Adds thickness to a surface or quilt is the description that the system gives you. So click on there. You can see a preview. You can see it's set itself up to do exactly what I said. It's added a wall thickness inwards in this case. Now, if we wanted to add it in the opposite direction, we could, but that would just mean that the shape that we've just modeled up using the style feature was the interior of this shape, this thickened shape. Whereas it tends to make more sense to design the exterior, certainly for a grip, and then simply add a thickness of material inwards so that you as the designer have control over the shape that the final user will be actually holding in their hand. But in certain instances, depending on what you're designing, thickening it outwards is acceptable as well. It depends on the actual product that you're trying to design. So I'm just clicking on the arrow to reverse the sense of that thickness command. So in our case, we do have a thickness value to work to, which is 2.5. So if I click on OK there, and then what I can do, because we've now thickened our surface, the actual surface itself, I no longer want to view it in the window. So you can, if you kind of zoom in here, you can see our thickened shape. This is the edge of it here. But then this blue line, it's a bit difficult to see on my screen, there's a blue line in there, represents the edge of our merged surfaces, which is kind of superimposing themselves on top of this thickened shape. So I kind of no longer want to view those. I want to hide everything above the thicken. So when I say above the thicken, I mean everything that was created before the thicken feature. I just want to view the result of that thicken feature. I don't want to view all the other features that went into creating it. I want to keep them. I don't want to delete them. I just want to make them invisible. So the way that I do that is I'll start with the merge by clicking on it, hold down the shift key, click on the top feature, which is the style, and then that icon that looks a little bit like a sort of eye with a cross through it or with a slash through it, that will hide them all. So now if I zoom in, you can kind of see that that surface with its blue edge is no longer being superimposed on what I'm looking at. So that's okay. So where are we headed to? Explain the join. The join will become more clear in the mouse example. So yeah, we're going to revisit that option, the join, and it will make a little bit more sense using the mouse tutorial as the example. So don't worry about that. Can I repeat the merge? Sorry, could you go back to how to create the surface? Oh no, my double clicking isn't working. Right, okay, so let's back up a few steps there. So I'll delete some of my features that I've created. So we'll delete that one. We'll make these other features visible. So there they are. Probably delete the merge as well. So I'm assuming everyone got to the mirror section. So there was the mirror. I'll just drop back into the mirror. Yeah, there's no sneaky options in there that we need to worry about. So we've got a mirror of that original surface shape. At that point, what we need to do is we need to merge these two surfaces together. And as a little side sort of note, you don't have to do this, just watch what I'm illustrating here. If we, let's have a go at thickening that one. Yeah. Let's see what happens if we thicken both of these. No, it's not even allowing me. So that's kind of one of the explanations of why we need to merge them and join them together, is that currently they exist as two sort of individual entities, if you like. And I cannot apply a thicken command to the pair of them because they are two separate things. They're not a unified surface at the moment. Or to give it its correct term, they're not a unified quilt. That's kind of the term that it uses for these sorts of surfaces. So the only option then would be if I clicked on one of them and thickened it, and then clicked on the other one and thickened it, I may get the outcome that I require, or I may not. Yeah, it's not ideal. I've set the wrong thicken value there. But it's fraught with sort of potential problems that it's far safer to merge the surfaces first into a unified quilt or a unified surface and then do a thicken command on the merged version of them, or the merge of the two of them. So let me delete those thicken commands, and then we'll do the merge. In order to activate the merge option at the top here, so you can see it's always there, but you can't click on it normally. You have to have selected either one or more, two or more surfaces in order to get access to it, because that's what it applies to. It applies to surfaces and it applies to merging them together into a unified surface. Now this is not a sort of terribly descriptive example of the tool because these surfaces meet at an edge, a perfect edge, because they're a mirror image of each other, and they've been mirrored about the plane where the original surface ends. So as I say, in the mouse example later on that we're going to work through, there's a sort of more useful example of the options in this tool. So we are going to activate the join command, and it's not going to make a terrible amount of sense what difference that makes in this example, but we will kind of revisit that in the mouse, and it should kind of make a little bit more sense. So yeah, we want to just OK that at this point. So now we have a merged pair of surfaces. So if we click on the merge feature there, we can thicken them as a unified single surface. So click on thicken. The thicken command's chosen to add material inwards in an inwards direction, which is what we want. But if we wanted to, in some other design that we were creating, we could flip the direction to add material on the outside of our surface if we needed to. So you just click on the arrow and it will just flip backwards and forwards. And then we can set the thickness that we're going to create. So in a way, this is sort of similar to that shell command that we were using the other week, where it's the opposite of the shell command. The shell command takes a solid block of material and it kind of hollows it out and leaves just a thin wall around the outside. Well, this is kind of approaching that problem, but from the opposite direction. This time we have an infinitely thin wall that has zero thickness to it, and we're telling the system to add some material, either inwards or outwards from it. But you end up achieving arguably the same thing. You end up with a part which is arguably destined for something like injection molding, where you want a thin-walled shape. So 2.5 inwards, we'll OK that. And then at that point, as I say, just because it kind of neatens up the display slightly, which isn't immediately obvious in this example again, but there's a surface sat on top of a solid object there. And I could try and illustrate that by colouring the surface in a certain colour. And yeah, that's not working. Try that again. We'll try applying it to the merge maybe. That's interesting. That's not working. You'll have to trust me for it. There's a blue edge there, which means we're looking at the edge of the surface there. So there's a surface sat on top of a solid, which isn't the best way to work. In this example, it's not causing a huge amount of problems, but it's just a good workflow that as soon as you've created a solid piece of material from your initial surfaces, you only kind of want to regard the solid, because kind of that's where the design is heading. Ultimately, you want to create a solid piece of material that you can create, let's say, a drawing of, or you can manufacture. You can't manufacture the surfaces, so I've hidden them so that they're not interfering with my view of the actual model itself. So we've got our thickened model. We've created some solid material. We have kind of a wall thickness now, so it has some volume to it, this part. You can analyze the volume using the analysis tools in the system. So can we move on to the next bit? So we've done the thicken. So at this point, I think what we're going to do is we're going to drop back in and we're going to add a little bit more sort of a sculpted shape to the final grip. So it may not be obvious in this view, but as well as these kind of indents that are intended to serve as kind of a finger grip, there's a sort of general indent in this side face here. So there's a sort of piece of that face that curves inwards, which we don't currently have on our shape. Ours has kind of an outward sort of arch shape to it all the way along. So it follows that kind of form that we set when we set the shape of these end curves. So what we're going to do now is we're going to drop back into the style feature and add some more styling, I suppose, for want of a better word, to this midsection. So we want a little bit more control over what the shape looks like if you were to, let's say, cross-section it in the center there. So we want it to sort of bulge inwards slightly in the center. So the way that we do that is we drop back into the style feature. And again, when you're using features to create sort of styled objects like this, the workflow tends to be rough out the overall shape, create some solid geometry from it, which is what we've done. We've ended up with a thicken, so we have some solid geometry. And then go back several times into the style feature and add more and more sort of detail or sculpted sort of forms to the actual end shape. And then every time you exit the style feature, the system will rebuild everything. It will run through the feature tree again, and you'll end up looking at the solid item, but with the extra kind of styling included. So yeah, you kind of get it up and running first in a simple form, and then keep going back in and revisiting it and just sort of tweaking the shape a little bit and styling it. So I'm going to click on the style feature, go to edit definition, and then what I want to do is I want to insert a new curve. So we have our 4 curves that we created initially, and then we have the surface that we created from them. What I want to do is add another curve, a 5th curve in the center section here. And all I want to do is I want to lock one end of the curve to that edge there, or that curve there, because there's a curve defining where that edge is. And then the other end of the curve to that edge there, or that curve there, because again, there's a curve there, which is why there is an edge of the surface there as well. And then I want to put one point in the center of this new curve. So that point will allow me the sort of luxury of moving that point inwards to create a little sort of indentation in the middle of my shape. So when I've created this curve, I'm going to sort of add it in to the surface itself. So I'm going to go back in and edit the surface and say, you no longer have 4 input curves, you now have 5 input curves. So we can sort of add it in after the creation of the surface itself. So let's create the curve first. So curve tool. We want to hold down shift because I've already said I want to lock the first point onto that edge there. So go near the edge and then click. And then I'm going to let go of shift because the middle point I don't want locked to anything in particular. So I'm going to drop it there. I've already made a mistake. This always happens when I'm talking and trying to do this task as well. So we should be sketching on the front plane here. And I've inadvertently left us sketching on the top plane. So I'm going to change that first. So let me cancel this curve. And then what you have to do is set active plane. So you can see currently we have a grid shown on the top plane. When we created all these 4 curves, we initially sketched them on the top plane. Now we want to sketch a curve on the front plane. So set active plane, click on the front plane, and you can see the effect that that has. So now we're sketching on the front plane. So I'll go back into create my curve now. Hold down the shift key, hover over the edge that we want to lock to. So there's the edge. Click, let go of shift. Let's say click there to put the middle point in. Rotate my view round a little bit. And then hold down shift again and lock the 3rd point onto that edge there. And then try and appreciate, has it worked? I don't think it quite has there, but that's okay. Let's try that again. Hold down shift, click on that edge. So I think it worked that time. So you may have a little bit of an issue with that, but if I click on OK just to investigate that a bit further, so it looks as if it has locked itself onto the 2 edges. The 2 endpoints appear to be on the edge, but for some reason it's come off the center plane, which is rather odd. So let me investigate this. Right, so mine had locked itself onto the edge there, so you can see there it is, locked onto the edge of the curve, but it's come away from the plane that it's meant to be on. So what I've done is exited out of editing it and then double clicked on it to go back in. And what I can do is the trick that we saw some people using earlier, where if you hold down shift and drag the endpoint, you can get it to lock itself to all sorts of things. So the plane should be one of those. It's coming away from the plane. This is odd. And step. There we go, on the plane, and then on the edge. I think. Yeah, that's a mystery as to why that's done. I'm going to back out of that and do that again. Often I'll run these tutorials and everything will go absolutely fine, and then we'll run them live and something will go a little bit amiss. So I'm going to try all that again. So curve, try and lock it onto the edge there. Is that one on the plane? So that one's not even on the plane. Aha, I've missed a step here. I do apologize. So what we should really do is that, I think, and we'll have another go. And if this doesn't work, I think we're just going to have to muddle through. And then let's put one there and put one there. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be keeping itself onto the plane. I made an assumption there that it would stick itself to the plane and it's not doing it. But we will make do with what we've got there, which is a curve, which certainly in my case has locked itself onto the two edges. So yeah, it looks as if everyone else's is. I think maybe I made an assumption there that it was going to do that, and it doesn't actually operate like that. So what we're going to do, as long as you've got a curve which has 3 points in it, which I think mine has, yeah. So if I double click on it to go back in to modify it, I can see the 3 points. And what you want to do is check that the two endpoints have locked themselves onto the edges of the original shape. So you can see that mine have. So I'm only free to drag them along the edges of the original shape like that. So if you haven't got that on yours, and maybe it's outside of the original shape there, what you do is hold down Shift, click on the endpoint of the curve, click and hold the left mouse button and drag it back to the edges. And when it gets near them, it will lock itself on because you're holding the Shift key down. And then again, I'll disconnect that one just as an example. So it's no longer attached to the edge of the original surface. Hold down the Shift key, click and drag with the left mouse button, and then drop it on the edge, and it will lock itself onto the edge then, like that. So that's kind of what we're looking for in the final design. And then I think, yeah, I should be free to drag this middle point wherever I need to. So that's not actually, although it's mine on the surface, yeah, I've made the mistake of locking mine onto the surface. So there's multiple pitfalls here that you can fall into. So if you're falling into them yourself, don't be surprised. So my midpoint there had locked itself onto the actual surface itself. So I was only free to drag that along the surface. But if you want to disconnect something, you hold down Shift and drag it away, and it will disconnect itself either from an edge or from a surface. So you can see my midpoint now, I'm free to drag it wherever I need to drag it. So yeah, that's sort of fraught that step with potential problems. So yours isn't either. We'll go in the references tab and selecting plane work. That is a good question. Aha, someone's just come up with the solution. Or they've led me to the solution. So yes, this often happens in the more involved tutorials. I skip a step in my head as I try and explain it. So let's back out of this, and I have the solution that we were looking for all along. So I've just deleted that last curve that I created there. So I came out of editing that curve. I'm still in the style feature, so you can see I'm still editing the style feature. I now have a curve there that I don't particularly want. So what I'm going to do is find it in the style tree over here, right click on it and go down to delete. Do I want to delete it? Yes, I do. So there was a missing step, and I, for whatever reason, had a little mental block there. Couldn't remember the step. So we want to create a new curve, and here's the new step. We don't want to create that sort of curve, a free curve. We want to create that sort of curve. Create a planar curve. So now everything that we sketch will be stuck to that plane. So that was the key step that I was missing there. So now what we can do, we still hold down Shift because we still want the first point of this curve stuck to that edge of the surface. So click, and then the middle point, I let go of Shift because I don't want it stuck to the surface at all. The middle point, I want the freedom to drag it where the surface isn't currently. So click in the middle. Then I'll rotate my view around. Now this is looking much better. You can see those 2 points are already stuck to the plane. Then for the final click, I'll hold down Shift again, hover over this edge of the surface this time, and click. So that is more like what we require. And then if I OK that one, and then double click on it to be able to drag it around, what I'm looking for is the ability to drag the middle point wherever I see fit and have the 2 endpoints anchor themselves to the edges of the original surface. So that's perfect. And the reason I want to do all this is I want to create that sort of, I suppose you'd call it like a scallop. So it's a sort of scalloped shape that goes into the side of the part. And the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to set that midpoint inside of the original surface, so smaller than the original surface. And then I'm going to click on these 2 ends, and I'm going to set their drag handles first to be normal to that plane, so not the plane that we're sketching on now, the top plane. So we know how to do that already. We long right click on one of the drag handles, tell it that we want to be normal to. It's then going to ask me normal to what, and I'm going to click on the top plane like that. So I want to do that on both ends. So here's the other end. So I'll long right click, normal to the top plane. So there's the top plane. So now they're pointing exactly vertically up or exactly away from the mirror plane. So that's what I want. And then I'm going to adjust them to such a length that they rise above, or they cause the curve to rise above this center section. And then maybe I'll drag that center section around to get the amount of that sort of inwards curvature that I require of my shape. So let's say I'm happy with that. So you get the kind of shape that we're aiming for. We're aiming for it to go up to a peak and then drop down into a trough in the middle, and then up to another peak and then down to the other end. So let's OK that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drop back into the definition of the surface itself. So the style surface is listed there under that icon. So we're going to click on that icon and edit the definition. And we're going to slot this curve into that definition. But it's not one of the boundaries of this surface. It needs to have an influence over the shape of the surface. So we don't want to put it in this entry box. We want to put it in this one here. Internal curve. So it's bounded by the other curves. It's not an external edge, if you like. Repeat the last step. Yes, of course I can. We're getting quite involved in this process now, so I'm not surprised that a few people are getting sort of left behind. So I'm in this style curve. Let me back up even further. So let me delete that style curve. So I'm adding this new curve in. I'm selecting curve, and then you want to make sure that you've got that option selected. So I'm pointing at it on the top menu bar. What that is, it's creating a curve on a plane, or it's a planar curve. So anything that we draw now will be stuck to that front plane there. The first point, before I begin sketching, I want to hold down shift so that this first point is going to stick itself to that edge of the surface. So that edge of the surface there, when I get near it whilst I'm holding shift, I get that cross sort of icon appearing. And then when I click, that first point has been locked onto that edge, as well as being locked onto the sketching plane as well. So the front plane in this case. Then I'm not going to hold shift because this next point, I don't want it locked to anything in particular. I'm just going to click somewhere there. So that point is free to move as long as it stays on that plane, because obviously we're using planar curve, which is always stuck to the plane. Then I'm going to rotate my view, and I'm going to hold shift again, because this last point, I want to lock it onto this edge of the surface. So that edge there, when I get near it, my pointer shows as a cross, and I'm going to click like that. And then I'll probably rotate just to inspect that what I think I did actually achieve, which looks correct. So all the points are sat on that plane. The end 2 points have locked themselves to the edges of the existing surface. And the midpoint, I made a mistake of clicking there, and I shouldn't have done. So I need to OK that. So I OK'd that curve feature to come out of the creation of it. And now what I want to do is just investigate that it does behave as I think it should behave. So I'm going to double click on it. So now what I can do is just drag the various points, or the middle point at least, around just to check that it's not attached itself to the surface. And it hasn't. It's free to move beyond the boundary of the surface itself, that middle point only. So I'm going to set it just inside of the surface like that. So it's got larger curvature than the actual surface. It doesn't rise as high up. Then what I'm going to do is click on one of the endpoints so I can see this drag handle that we've kind of edited before on these other 4 curves that we created. And what I want to do is, just like on these 2 end curves, we set the direction of influence to be normal to a plane. I want to do the exact same thing again. So I'm going to click the right mouse button and hold it for a second until I see this menu, but make sure that I'm over the drag handle itself. So you've got to go over the drag handle with your pointer, long right click, go down to normal. The system will then ask me, which plane do you want to make this normal to? And in this case, it's the top plane, because I want these drag handles to exit that plane, because that is the mirror plane that we've mirrored about when we create our final shape. So select that plane. The drag handle will then sort of stand straight upwards like that. And then I want to do the same thing, but on the other end of that curve. So there's the drag handle on that end. Long right click, normal. It's then asking me, which plane do you want to make it normal to? Top plane again. And then it will stand straight up like that. And again, I can drag it in terms of its amount of influence, but I now can't drag that drag handle to a different angle. It is always exiting that plane at 90 degrees. And ultimately, the shape I'm trying to create here is something like this. So I'm increasing that drag handle a bit, increasing this one a little bit as well, and then maneuvering that middle point to get something like that has sort of a scallop shape that sort of is going to be inserted into the middle of our surface. So that's kind of what I'm aiming for, that kind of shape. So I'll click on OK. Then I've essentially accepted that curve. That curve's appeared in my style sort of model tree. So you can see the style model tree. If I can click away from that, I've lost it there. There it is. So it's sort of a mini version of the main model tree, but it's all contained within this style feature. So this style feature has all these sub features or sub entities stored within it. You can see my initial 4 curves that I used to create the surface, and now you can see my 5th curve that I've just created as well. And you can see the surface itself. So what I'm intending to do is I'm intending to go in and edit the surface and add this 5th curve in as a curve which will influence the shape of the actual surface itself. So what we're going to do, we're going to click on the surface icon there. We're going to go and edit its definition, just like we do with all the features. If you want to go back into them to the same stage that you were at as you were creating them and defining them, go in and edit the definition. And then if we just click on the references tab here, because I think we covered this the other week, you can breeze through the creation of these features really easily and not get into the sort of nitty-gritty of all the different sub-features. But you kind of work more like that when you're quite experienced within Creo. Certainly when you're first using it, it's quite useful to open all these tabs up and have a little sort of look around at all the different options that are available, even if you're not using them. So what we're going to do is open the References tab. And where it says 4 chains up here on the summary, if you open the References tab, you get kind of a more detailed summary of that. So there it just says there are 4 chains. Here we can kind of click through them and they should sort of highlight on the model, although it's not immediately obvious. So this would be this one down here, number 4. Number 1 is at the top there. So yeah, you get the idea. So these chains are what's known as the primary chains. They define the boundaries of our surface, so the outer edges. This one that we're trying to insert is not in that category. It doesn't define the outer edges of the surface. It's something to do with the internal shape of the surface. So we enter that in this box here, internal chain references. So click on the box. It's now waiting for some input. So then we'll just click on the curve and hopefully you get a sense of what that's just done. So you can see the effect that it's had on our surface. It's added that kind of general shape to the midsection where it's located in that surface. So we've gained control over how that surface changes between this end and that end. We've added an extra sort of layer of control within there. So when we do that, we're going to click on OK to OK that. Just appreciate what it looks like when you OK it. Exit the style feature like that. Now we can appreciate what it looks like when it's thickened. So again, our model tree has rebuilt itself using that new surface shape as its starting point. So you can see it bulges inwards there. So yeah, let's move on to the next bit. I think we've got sort of one major step left in this setup now, which is kind of editing the lower sort of spine here to insert the grip shape into it. And again, when you're working with these surfaces and these designs that are more kind of based on ergonomics and aesthetics, where it's a little bit harder to define exactly hard numbers, you will tend to use this sort of working method where you create the initial feature and then you evaluate it and maybe view it from a few different angles. Maybe you might do a few renders of it even. Show it to people, get their opinion on it. You may do a 3D print of it so that you can sort of feel the shape. And then you'll want to go back in and make some subtle changes, maybe add little bits that sort of change the surface curve direction like we've done there. We've added a sort of internal curve rather than a bulge outwards. and maybe what we're about to do, which is add certain ergonomic features, so grips and things like that. You may want to do something like that. So let's add this grip shape. So we're going to edit the style feature that all this geometry is based on again. So I'll click on the style feature, go into edit definition. This time we're going to edit this lower curve. So if we need to find out which curve that is, we can just click through the tree of them here and it will highlight in green. I think it's that one on my setup, so CF4. It may be numbered slightly differently on yours. So if I click on it, or can I double click on it in the window? Yes, it's easier just to click on it in the graphics window. So you don't need to find it in the style tree, just double click on it in the graphics window. And what I'm looking to do is add some further points into this curve. So if we have a little look, that's kind of what we're aiming for. So our curve currently just has 3 points defining its shape. So it has an end point at either end, and then it has some point somewhere near the center section as well. But what we are looking to do is add enough in that we can put at least 4 indents into the actual shape itself. And that is reasonably easy to do. So somewhere along the length of the curve, just right click. Again, you will have to hold the right mouse button for a second or two to get this menu to appear. So right click on the curve, add point, and a point appears where you click. And then you've got the ability to push that point inwards and see its effect, or pull that point out and see its effect. And more than that, you can see where the line or where the curve previously was positioned, which is quite useful. So you can see how much modification you're actually doing with your new point. So that's quite a nice little reference to try and get the scale of these indents to be appropriately sized, because obviously we don't want to push them in to such an extreme level as that. We just want to kind of subtly alter the previous shape of this curve. So I'm going to right click there, add another point, and this one wants to come out slightly. And then do it again, you get the idea. Right click again, add point, push that one in. Maybe this original one, I'll probably drag it closer over here. And then again, keep progressing along the actual length. And what we're looking for on this design is 4 indents to correspond to 4 fingers. So obviously it's intended as a grip to be held in the hand. So I think that's more or less the kind of shape that we want. And then again, if we wanted to, we could affect the sort of influence of the direction of each end. So you can see I've clicked on the very end of this curve, and then I can play around with the sort of directional influence of the end point there as well. So you've got various tools to achieve these, what would otherwise be really difficult shapes to try and define. There's no kind of easy way to create this sort of shape as we're looking at it using the more traditional extrudes and revolves and some of the other techniques that are available. Surfacing or surface modeling is kind of the way that you've got to use to create these more sort of organic looking shapes. So yeah, you can play around with that until you're satisfied that it's kind of the right shape. My index finger indent up here is a little bit big, so maybe I'd kind of drag that into position. When you're happy with it, click on OK, and then that obviously exits the editing of the curve, but we're still inside the style feature and we're still editing the style feature. So you're going to have to click on OK a second time to exit out of the style feature. And then again, because we've already set up a model tree that ultimately creates a thickened part, so it creates the solid geometry that we need to actually take this part forward and eventually take it into production, we get a full update of what this now looks like. And again, we could go back in, we could keep tweaking the shape, we could do things like prototyping or rendering and things like that. Can I do adding the point again? Yeah, we can do that again. So back into the style feature just by clicking on the style feature, go into edit definition, and then adding points onto a curve. So this is the curve. So I'm just going to double click, and then if I right click on the curve at any given point, so when I say right click, you've got to hold the right mouse button until this menu pops up, and then there's just add point as an option there. And let's say I have a point that I want to get rid of. It's as simple as selecting the point by clicking on it and just pressing, I was going to say delete, but long right click on the point, and then there's a delete option in that menu that pops up. So you can do that as well if you need to. And then when you're happy with the shape of that curve, click on the green tick to OK it, and then you're still editing the style feature itself. You've just okayed the curve, which is within the style feature. So you've got to click a second time to get out of the style feature itself. And then the whole model tree will update, and you've got your new shape there. So yeah, I'm just keeping an eye on the time here. So we've got 15 minutes. What I had hoped to do in in the overall session was to do the mouse example as well. I think we might jump into that because there was a little bit of kind of simple rendering and shape evaluation that we were going to do at the end of this session. But I think what we'll do is we'll tackle more of that when we do a kind of rendering tutorial. So yeah, we'll get to that. I'm keen to get onto the mouse example in this session. How can you change the color? Yeah, let's shelve that just for this session. As I say, we're going to revisit editing the appearance of things and setting up lighting and creating renders. But yeah, I'm very aware that we could do with at least starting the mouse example in this session. So yeah, we'll revisit the color thing. Don't worry about that. But yeah, let's move on to the mouse example. So you may want to save that. That's one of the more sort of difficult skills to master. So if you save the grip, you can refer back to that in the future. So you can sort of come back in and pull it apart and sort of analyze it a little bit and see how it was created. So I would take a save of that and save it wherever you are saving all your tutorial files. So click on the save icon, click on OK. So I'll just save mine there. It's saying one of these already exists in there. Do you want to continue? I'd then click on OK. So yeah, you get the idea. And what we'll do is just jump into a new part, I think. There's no need to shut this one down because we're kind of going for speed this time. So new part is that sheet of paper looking icon at the top of the screen. I forget what this one's called. You may want to call it mouse. I suppose that's as good a name as any. So we can click through on all the default options there. And then how are we going to initiate this? So the way that we're going to kick this off in terms of a design is we're not going to use the styling tool because as sort of complicated as this shape is, I want to show you another way of sort of achieving these surface models. So the joystick or the flight stick was kind of using the styling tool specifically, and you kind of saw that methodology of you can go in and you can drag points around quite easily, and you get all the direction influence handles that you can drag around. This is more using the sketch tools that we kind of use regularly. So you can see on this screenshot, we're in the standard sketch menu now. Now we're using tools like the spline that we haven't used before. but we're in the same menu that has the arc and the line tool and the circle tool in. So this is more familiar territory, and this is equally valid. If you can use this method to create the shape that you need for your design, by all means. But the styling tool allows you sort of more control over the final shape, whereas this is a little bit more crude. But it does have its advantages as well. So this is what we're looking to create initially. So this is the approximate boundary shape when we are viewing the mouse from above. So when we're viewing it like this, the approximate overall length and approximate overall width and the general sort of form of the larger sort of side faces. This is what we're kind of creating here. So let's do that now. So we're looking down from above. So I would say that we're sketching on the top plane. So in order to just create a sketch, not a sketch which is initiated by, say, an extrude or a revolve, you just click on the sketch icon there. So there's a sketch icon within the model tab. Click on sketch. The system will then ask you what plane do you want to sketch on. Top plane for us. And then what it does is it picks one of the other datum planes as what's known as a reference. So mine's picked the right plane, and it said, do you want to regard that plane that I've picked, that happens to be the right plane, as right in your sketch? And I'm happy with that, so I'm going to sketch. So the first thing I'm going to do, because what we're going to do this time is we're going to kind of define the horizontal and vertical extents of our shape. So the eventual curves that we create will stay within a rectangular perimeter, which is defined as 100 high and 60 wide. So we're going to draw a rectangle first, just as a point of reference. It's not going to go into creating the actual surfaces, but it is there in this sketch as our reference tool so that we can size our curves to be just within it. So rectangle is what we're going to create first. And we're going to lock it to the origin because it's convenient for us to lock it to the origin point. So we're going to create a center rectangle. So center rectangle is available in that drop down menu at the side of the rectangle tool. Lock it onto the origin and then just drag it out to around about that size. And then we can click on OK or hit the escape key is the way that I like to do it, to just OK that rectangle and get out of the rectangle tool. And then we're just going to edit the weak dimensions that are here. So I'm double clicking, entering the sizes that I need. So it was 60 by 100, like that. And then what I'm going to do is do a box select over the entire rectangle. So I select everything, and then of the two icons that pop up, I want to click on that one, which is also available. So that's convert sketch geometry into construction geometry. So that it turns them into dashed lines essentially. But if I wiggle my mouse about, that option disappears, but it's actually available in the menu at the top there as well. So construction mode. So basically what that tells the system, if I can double click on that, it didn't work. Sorry, I'm telling you the wrong thing there. So I should have accepted that option that popped up. So construction mode. And then on my system, I didn't realize that this was the option on my system. You may be seeing something slightly different if you've set the system colors to be different to mine. But mine indicates construction geometry with this sort of dark pink, sort of magenta color. In other versions of Creo that I've used, it actually represents them as dashed lines. So you may be seeing something slightly different. But you can check whether it has been switched to construction by hovering over it, and the little pop-up will tell you whether it's a construction line or whether it's actually a solid piece of sketch geometry. So these are all construction, so that's okay. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to roughly sketch out these 4 curves that define the kind of outer perimeter of my mouse shape. And the tool that I'm going to use is similar to the tool that we used in the style feature. It's this spline tool here. So select the spline tool. The first spline that I'm going to create, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. It's going to be this top one on the kind of top edge. I'm going to drop the first point there. So I'm going to click, and then I'm going to drop the second point. I might let it lock itself to that vertical plane. So I'll click again there. And then the third point, I'll probably click so it locks itself to the edge of the box there. And again, don't be too precious about these. And then the fourth point that I'm being offered here, I don't want. So I'm going to hit the escape key just to exit the sketch, the spline that I was creating. So that's the first spline created. Then I'm going to zoom out a little bit and I'm going to create the second one. So I want to lock it onto the edge or onto the end point of the first one there. And then I want it to curve kind of subtly sort of outwards. I'm not going to choose to lock to the edge of the rectangle here. I'm going to come inwards slightly. And then I'm going to, again, scale and pan my view a little bit to get where I need to be. I'll probably drop that there. And then hit escape again. So that's the second one. So that's the other edge that has very, very subtle curvature to it at the moment. Not too much at all. Then I'm going to create a third spline. So I want to lock it onto this end. I want to give this one some quite sort of severe inwards curvature because this is a sort of right-handed mouse. So it wants to curve to the kind of left. And then I'm going to zoom in a little bit there. And again, I'm not being too precious about these points. I'm just dropping them wherever seems appropriate at the moment, knowing that I can come back in and I can play with these positions later on. I'm not trying to hit the final shape that I'm going to use on the first attempt. And then I'm going to put a final spline in. So make sure I've got the spline tool selected, go from somewhere over there to there, and then press escape again. So I've got 4 kind of independent splines. The only thing that's sort of linking them, if you like, is that they share endpoints. So I've ensured that when I've sketched the next spline, I've locked it to the endpoint of its neighbor. So you can see as I drag these around, the points move. But generally, they are within my boundary shape. So that's why I put that boundary shape there, so that I could use it as a judge of where these curves are ending up in the design. So at that point, I'm happy with that sketch, so I'm going to OK it. As I say, I fully intend to come back into that and maybe modify it later on. But that's okay as a starting point for my initial feature. And the initial feature that I'm going to create is an extrude, but it's a specific type of extrude. It's going to be a surface extrude rather than a solid. So I've got the sketch selected there. You can see it's highlighted in green on my display. Yours might be slightly different color. And then with it selected, I'm going to click on the extrude feature. It's going to default to offering me a solid extrude. So you can see from the preview, that's a solid block of material. That's not what I intend for this design. Not at this point anyway, because I want to stay working in surfaces for the time being. So up there in the extrude options bar at the top, solid is the default, surface is also an option, and you can see the effect that that has. So these 4 surfaces that get created have 0 thickness to them, and you can use all the surface modifying tools that we were looking at, the merge and the intersect and the trim. All of those become available because I'm still working in surfaces. So that's what I'm going to select. And then the height, again, I'm not too bothered about the height because later on what the intention is, whether we get there or not. What I'll do if we don't get there is I'll point you in the right direction of an online version of this. Is we are going to intersect two sets of surfaces that are too big, and we're going to get the system to merge them together and trim them back. So this is the intention later on. So you can see my original extrude that we're in the middle of creating there goes way too high. It goes beyond where the top of the mouse will be. So this is known as overbuilding. We're overbuilding the surfaces, knowing that we're going to trim them back using other surfaces later on in the design process. So what height are we going to send this to? Let's have a look if there's a reference on one of these slides. Yeah, 50, which is way too high for what we need. And again, because we know we're overbuilding these, I'm not even going to hit 50. I'm going to 56. That will do. That's fine. And this is kind of more of the workflow, certainly at this stage. So let's create some side splines. So what I'm going to do initially, I want to create a spline shape on that plane. So that would be the right plane. And then what I want is I want a plane which is offset from the right plane, which is almost in line with this face. And then I want a plane which is offset from the right plane in this direction, which is almost in line with these two edges. So I'm going to create those two planes before I begin sketching. And the way that you create new planes is there, plane, create a data plane. And what I'm going to reference is the right plane. So if I click on the right plane, and then all I get is a little drag circle there where I can drag a distance away from that right plane. So you can see that plane's moving in and out. And again, because this is more to do with the style of this thing at this point, I'm going to place this just by looking down from above and placing this plane just outside of the current sort of boundary formed by that first extrude that I created, like that. So the plane just sits beyond. And this again goes somewhere towards this overbuilding that we're going to do. We're going to build surfaces which are too large, knowing that we're going to use the trim tool to trim them back. And this is kind of it's the method that when you're modeling with these surfaces is often least problematic, to overbuild them and trim them back. So I'll OK that plane, and then we'll do the same thing again. This time I'm going to pre-select the right plane because this is a different workflow to achieve exactly the same thing. So pre-select the right plane, then click on create new plane, and it automatically accepts that right plane as input there. And it just allows me to drag the position of my outside plane there. So you can see I've gone slightly beyond the edge of my extruded part. And again, I may come back in and edit that distance at a later date. So accept that. So I've got three planes. So very quickly, what are we going to do? We've just gone beyond the time limit. I think what I'll do, let me have a poke around in my existing tutorials and see if this mouse tutorial is included. I suspect it probably is. It's just a matter of knowing where I've filed it away. Online tutorials, there we go. So let's see if we can find it. If not, I will record you one and upload it into the section down below. So is the mouse included? I can't spot it in there. I will quickly record the mouse because we're sort of a good way into it now, and I'd like to sort of share that technique with you. So yeah, we'll end this session, but I will upload the sort of modeling of the mouse for you to follow through, and I will post it in. I'll probably post it in that section there, rather than posting the bit that we've done in this session and then trying to add a little bit on the end. I'll actually post it in that general link there, which takes you to all my Creo tutorials. So I'll slot it in at the top as well, so it's easy to find. So the mouse surfacing tutorial. But yeah, I think we'll call it a day today. We'll end the session there, and yeah, I'll see everyone next week for next week's lesson.
Chris.
Yeah.
Have you already recorded that? Or
the session today, or just the mouse bit?
Just the mouse bit.
I haven't done just the mouse bit, no. But it's relatively quick if I'm just working through on my own. And I mean, you can pretty much follow the clicks that I'm doing then, because you can keep. Go on, sorry.
I was going to say, would you be able to do the rendering of the end of the?
Oh yeah, there's that one as well. Yeah. Seeing as I've still got it on my screen, I don't really need to show you the modeling of that, so I'll have a play around in terms of the rendering of it. And again, I'll give it sort of minimal instruction, but I'll put my little readout at the bottom left that shows you what keys and mouse clicks I'm doing, so that you should be able to run that at whatever speed you need to follow it, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I'll do that as well. But yeah, let me end this session so that I've got time to get those videos recorded for you. Okay?
Thank you.
No probs. All right, I'll see everyone next week. Keep an eye on your timetables as well, because I've been told this session may be split into a slightly earlier group and a slightly later group, because we've got a lot of people in one session at the moment. So just keep checking your timetables, that's all. I don't know when that's actually going to occur, but yeah, just keep checking them each week, and if they change, at least you'll know. Okay, I'll see everyone next time. Bye.